I want to tell you about a moment that completely stopped me. I was sitting across from someone I deeply cared about, someone who had spent months showing me through their actions, rather than their words, that they were perfectly fine. They acted like they didn't need me, like the distance between us was healthy, normal, and simply part of who they were. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday that seemed no different from any other day, they said something so small that I almost overlooked it. They said, "I don't know. Things have just felt a little off lately." That was it. Just one sentence. But I knew there was something much deeper underneath those words. By that point, I had spent enough time understanding avoidant attachment to recognize what off could really mean. It could mean they were beginning to miss me. It could mean the absence was affecting them in a way their nervous system didn't know how to explain. It could mean that the very feelings they had spent years protecting themselves from had somehow found their way through the walls they had built, and now they had no idea how to put those feelings into words. That's what we're talking about here. Not whether avoidants have feelings, because they absolutely can. The real question is whether those feelings ever make their way to the surface. And honestly, most of the time, they don't come out in obvious ways, not in ways you would easily recognize, and sometimes not even in ways the avoidant themselves recognizes. But there are signs. Very specific, quiet, almost hidden signs that an avoidant may be missing you while simultaneously suppressing every signal of it with the kind of psychological defense system they may have spent years developing. Most people misunderstand this completely. They wait for big gestures. They expect the avoidant to finally say everything they have been feeling. They look for the dramatic confession, the emotional phone call, or the long message sent at midnight explaining every hidden emotion. And when none of those things happen, they assume the avoidant simply doesn't care. But that's not usually how avoidance works. Before anything else, you need to understand one important thing. Avoidant individuals may cope with emotional distress by deactivating their attachment system. In simple terms, they can suppress uncomfortable feelings so quickly and automatically that it can reduce their conscious motivation to reach toward another person. That idea of deactivation is important because it does not necessarily mean the feeling disappears. It means the feeling can be pushed down so quickly and automatically that the person doing the suppressing may genuinely believe it is not there. Think about that for a moment. The missing can be real, the emotional reaction can be real, but the suppression can be so strong, so practiced through years of emotional self-management that an avoidant can look directly at you and say, "I'm fine," while genuinely believing they are fine in that moment. Meanwhile, their body and behavior may be communicating something completely different. Research has also suggested that people with avoidant attachment can show physiological stress responses even when they appear calm externally. Their heart rate may change. Their facial expressions may reveal discomfort that they are not consciously aware of. There can be a gap between what is happening internally and what they actually express outwardly. And that gap is a major part of understanding avoidant behavior. Once you recognize it, you stop judging everything by their words alone. You stop assuming that the surface tells the entire story. Instead, you begin paying attention to their behavior, their patterns, their reactions, and the small changes that happen when their emotions become difficult to suppress. The first sign is that they start picking fights over things that seem completely unimportant. You say something neutral, and suddenly they react sharply, or they become cold because of something so small that you spend an hour wondering what you possibly did wrong. You replay the conversation in your mind. You search for the exact sentence that caused the change. You try to find the mistake, but sometimes you can't find one because the argument isn't really about the thing you're arguing about. Here's what may actually be happening. Avoidant coping strategies can include minimizing the importance of the relationship, explaining distance as necessary, focusing on flaws, or mentally creating reasons to stay emotionally disconnected. When feelings of longing or emotional pressure become stronger, irritation can become a kind of release. That emotional energy has to go somewhere. It may feel too vulnerable to come out as, "I miss you." Saying that would require openness. It would expose something they have spent a long time protecting. So instead, the feeling may come out indirectly as frustration, criticism, sudden coldness, or an unexpected need to find something wrong with you, the conversation, or even the situation itself. That doesn't mean every argument proves an avoidant is secretly missing you. People can become irritated for many different reasons. But when this behavior appears alongside other changes in their pattern, it can become meaningful. They may not be intentionally trying to hurt you. They may simply be responding to an internal emotional pressure they don't know how to express directly. Conflict can feel safer than vulnerability because conflict allows them to remain emotionally protected while still releasing some of what they are experiencing. The second sign is when they make small, low-pressure contact for no obvious reason. Maybe they send you a meme, maybe they send a song, maybe they suddenly say, "Hey, did you see this?" and attach a random link. Maybe they respond to a story you posted several days ago with just one word. Nothing serious, nothing that clearly asks for anything, nothing that openly reveals emotion. Just a tiny thread of connection that gives them a reason to contact you while still leaving them plenty of room to deny that the interaction meant anything. And I really want you to understand this part. A small message can sometimes carry more meaning than it appears to. Avoidance strategies can operate automatically, often outside conscious awareness. That means even a simple attempt at contact may represent a small movement against the system that normally tells them to stay distant. The message may look casual to you, it may even look meaningless, but the important part is that they decided to send it. They could have remained silent, they could have ignored the thought, they could have continued with their day. Instead, something inside them created enough motivation to make contact. The third sign is when they bring up shared memories without you asking. You're talking about something completely unrelated, and suddenly they say, "That reminds me of when we..." Then they mention a specific moment from months ago. Maybe it was a place you visited. Maybe it was something funny that happened between you. Maybe it was a small detail you assumed they had forgotten, but somehow they remember it. That can be significant because avoidant individuals may use mental and emotional strategies to reduce the intensity of attachment-related feelings. When a memory connected to the relationship reaches the surface and actually becomes something they say out loud, it may show that the memory has become emotionally active again. The important part is not simply that they remember. People remember things all the time. The interesting part is when a personal memory appears naturally during an unrelated conversation and they choose to share it with you. It can be a small opening in the emotional wall. For a moment, something that might normally remain inside their head becomes visible. You get to see a part of their emotional world that they usually keep private. They may not realize how revealing that moment is. They may say it casually and move on, but sometimes those small moments tell you more than a dramatic speech ever could. The fourth sign is that they become more irritated or emotionally reactive when you are no longer available to them. This is one of the most confusing signs, and honestly, it is the one that causes many people to misunderstand avoidant behavior. When you are warm, open, emotionally available, and actively trying to build connection, the avoidant pulls away. That's the familiar pattern. But pay attention to what can happen when you stop chasing. When you become busy with your own life, when you stop constantly checking in, when you stop giving all of your attention to them, or when your energy begins moving somewhere else, their behavior may suddenly change. They may become more present. They may suddenly want to know how you're doing. They may ask questions they didn't ask before. They may become unusually interested in your plans. There may even be a strange edge in their voice that sounds like irritation, concern, insecurity, or something close to jealousy. This can feel confusing because you might think, why are they suddenly paying attention now? Where was this energy when I was right there? But that's exactly what makes avoidant attachment so difficult to understand. When closeness feels intense, distance can feel safer. But when the person they expected to remain available begins creating genuine distance, the emotional situation changes. The avoidant may suddenly become aware that the connection they assumed would always be. There is no longer guaranteed. That does not mean every avoidant will react this way, and it does not mean every change in behavior proves they are missing you. But when their behavior shifts specifically after you stop pursuing them, it can be worth noticing. Dismissive avoidants may report experiencing less conscious longing because their attachment system can suppress those signals as a defense. In other words, they may not sit around thinking, I miss this person, in the same obvious way another person might. Instead, the feeling can appear indirectly. It can show up as curiosity. It can show up as irritation. It can show up as suddenly noticing your absence. It can show up as wanting to know where you are, what you're doing, or whether you still care. The feeling may not arrive in the form of a clear emotional statement. It may arrive as a behavioral change. And this is where you need to be careful. The goal is not to turn every small action into proof that someone secretly loves you. The goal is to understand patterns without becoming trapped inside them. One isolated message does not tell you everything. One memory does not prove someone wants a relationship. One jealous reaction does not automatically mean they are ready for emotional closeness. What matters is the larger pattern over time, because the deeper truth is this. Someone can miss you and still be unable to build a healthy relationship with you. Someone can think about you and still choose distance. Someone can feel emotional pain and still avoid vulnerability. Missing someone is a feeling. Building a secure relationship is a skill. Those are not the same thing. And that distinction may be one of the most important things you can understand about an avoidant. You don't need to spend your life decoding every silence, every message, every delayed response, or every sudden change in behavior. If someone truly wants to create a healthy connection with you, eventually their actions need to become clear enough that you don't have to constantly analyze them. Because sometimes the most powerful sign isn't that an avoidant misses you, it's that they begin becoming capable of showing up differently. It's when distance is replaced by communication, when avoidance is replaced by honesty, when fear is acknowledged instead of disguised as indifference, and when the person who once needed emotional distance begins learning how to tolerate emotional closeness without running from it. That is the real transformation to watch for. Not whether they miss you in silence, but whether they can turn those feelings into healthy action. because feelings can exist behind walls for years, but a relationship can only grow when someone becomes willing to open the door. The attachment system is still working underneath all of that. And when you stop being predictably available, it can become activated. Their nervous system may notice your absence before their conscious mind is willing to admit that it matters. So they become more restless. They may reach out in small and indirect ways, yet they may never connect their own behavior to the possibility that they actually miss you. And when you really think about it, there is something deeply sad about that. Sign 5 is that they protect their feelings specifically around you. Highly avoidant people can believe that showing emotional distress places an unfair burden on their partner, and this belief can become even stronger when they feel more dependent on the relationship. Researchers have described a behavior called protective buffering, where someone hides their own emotional struggles in an attempt to protect the other person or the relationship. Think about that again. The more connected they feel, the more carefully they may hide what is happening inside. This should change the way you look at certain behaviors. When an avoidant is genuinely emotionally connected to you, when you truly matter to them, their natural response may not be to show their feelings more openly. It may be to hide those feelings even more carefully. They may have learned to believe that seeking closeness will not actually make their emotional distress better. They may fear that depending on someone will lead to rejection, punishment, disappointment, or a loss of independence. Because of that, the depth of what they feel can become the very reason they push it further underground. The more they miss you, the quieter they may become about it. The more they want connection, the harder they may work to appear as though they do not need it. And that is the painful paradox of avoidance. Their feelings can make them hide instead of move closer. What looks like emotional indifference from the outside can sometimes be a complicated attempt to stay emotionally protected on the inside. But remember, this does not mean every distant person secretly has deep feelings. It means that for someone who already shows a consistent avoidant pattern, emotional suppression can sometimes make their behavior difficult to read. Sign 6 is when their body language begins saying things their words refuse to say. Pay attention to what they actually do when they are physically around you, not simply what they tell you. Avoidant individuals can consciously redirect their attention away from emotional triggers. They may try to focus on practical things, change the subject, or mentally move away from whatever makes them feel emotionally exposed. But when suppressed emotions become stronger, that control can sometimes become harder to maintain. They may stay in a conversation slightly longer than necessary. They may find small reasons to remain in the same space as you. They may not initiate physical contact, but they also may not immediately pull away when closeness happens naturally. They may remember something you mentioned weeks earlier and casually bring it up as if it means nothing. They may notice small details about your life that you assumed they had completely forgotten. These behaviors can be meaningful when they appear as part of a larger pattern. They can represent emotional signals coming through the channel that feels safest to them. Behavior can be denied if someone questions it. It can be quickly pulled back if the situation suddenly feels too emotionally intense. The avoidant can stay close without having to openly admit that they want closeness. Their mind may have learned to redirect emotional longing into something quieter before it ever becomes a clear, conscious thought. That process takes effort. It is not necessarily an absence of emotion. Sometimes it is emotion that has become extremely skilled at hiding itself. And this is why watching patterns can be more useful than analyzing one isolated moment. One glance does not tell you everything. One conversation does not prove anything. But repeated behavior can give you a clearer picture of what is actually happening. Sign 7 is that they do not completely move on. Weeks pass, maybe months pass, yet there is still a small thread connecting them to you. They still seem to notice. They still appear around the edges of your life. They have not completely closed the door. They may have simply stopped standing directly in front of it. Some research suggests that avoidantly attached individuals can still experience missing and regret after a breakup, even when they appear emotionally distant. The difference is that they may deal with those feelings through suppression rather than open emotional expression. They may appear cold even when they are struggling internally. They may not talk about their grief. They may not tell friends how much the breakup affected them. They may not openly acknowledge the loss. And because the grief is hidden, everyone around them may assume it does not exist. But the absence of visible grief does not automatically mean the absence of grief. An avoidant who has genuinely moved forward may become quiet in a very different way. They may completely detach from the connection and stop investing attention in it. But someone who is still emotionally caught in the connection may remain somewhere in the background. They may notice what you are doing. They may occasionally appear. They may remain curious. They may keep some small connection alive without actually taking the emotional risk of closing the distance. That distinction matters, but it also needs to be understood carefully. Someone remaining in your peripheral does not automatically mean they are ready to return, change, or build a relationship with you. Sometimes people stay connected because they are uncertain. Sometimes because they are curious. Sometimes because they are struggling to let go. And sometimes because they simply have not decided what they want. The behavior can provide information, but it cannot provide a guarantee. Now, here is the part I really want you to sit with. Understanding these 7 signs does not mean waiting is the answer. It does not mean that if you remain patient enough, understanding enough, careful enough, or available enough, their emotional defenses will eventually disappear and they will suddenly give you everything you need. These deactivating strategies often exist because they protect a person from emotional pain they learned to fear long ago. They may provide temporary comfort, but they can also create serious long-term problems in relationships. They can leave the other person confused, rejected, uncertain, and emotionally exhausted. And the difficult part is that suppression is usually not something that disappears simply because someone meets the right person. It can be a deeply established emotional system. And you cannot love someone out of a system they have not decided to change. You cannot be patient enough to dismantle it for them. You cannot give so much understanding that they suddenly become emotionally secure. You cannot carry their emotional work for them. That responsibility belongs to them. What you can do, and what may be the most important thing you can do, is become honest about your own needs, not what they might eventually be capable of giving you, not what they could become someday. Not what you hope they will understand after enough time has passed. Ask yourself what you need right now, consistently, in order to feel respected, safe, valued, and emotionally secure. Because here is the uncomfortable truth I wish more people understood sooner. An avoidant can miss you deeply and still be unable to love you in the way you need to be loved. Both things can exist at the same time. They can think about you, they can remember you, they can feel your absence, they can even struggle with emotions they never openly admit. And still, they may not be capable of giving you the consistency, communication, emotional openness, and security that a healthy relationship requires. That is why these signs should never become a reason to stay trapped in waiting. They are not a promise, they are not proof of future commitment, they are information. They can help you understand behavior, but they should never replace your own judgment about what you need from a relationship. The most important question is not simply, do they miss me? The deeper question is, what are they actually willing and able to do with those feelings? Because missing someone is an emotion, choosing someone is an action, thinking about someone is an emotion, showing up consistently is an action, feeling connected to someone is an emotion, building a healthy relationship requires behavior, and that difference can save you from spending months or even years trying to decode someone who is not giving you what you need. You do not have to prove that you are worth choosing. You do not have to become perfect enough to make someone feel safe. You do not have to disappear just to make someone realize your value. And you do not have to keep waiting simply because there is a possibility that someone is secretly struggling with their feelings. Sometimes the healthiest form of clarity comes from accepting that someone can care about you and still not be capable of giving you the relationship you deserve. Their limitations do not define your worth. Their silence does not determine your value. Their avoidance does not mean you are too much. And their inability to express what they feel does not become your responsibility to fix. If they genuinely want to build something with you, the responsibility eventually has to move from hidden feelings to visible action. They have to communicate, they have to take responsibility, they have to become willing to face the discomfort that comes with intimacy. They have to stop expecting distance to solve every emotional problem, and most importantly, they have to choose growth for themselves. Because the goal should never be to become so good at reading an avoidant that you can predict every hidden emotion they have. The goal is to reach a point where you no longer need to decode someone just to understand whether you matter. You deserve a connection where care does not have to be constantly investigated, where affection does not have to be translated from silence, where closeness does not always feel like a threat, and where the person you love is willing to meet you in the middle instead of leaving you alone to interpret every signal. So yes, an avoidant may miss you. They may hide it. They may express it through small behaviors. They may struggle to understand their own emotions. But never let the possibility of hidden feelings become more important than the reality of how they treat you. Because in the end, the most meaningful sign is not that they miss you when you are gone. It is that they are willing to show up when you are there. To them, love can feel like both a safe home and a dangerous place at the same time. The depth you bring, the emotional connection you offer, and the intensity of what they feel can frighten them even while a part of them deeply wants it, and that creates a difficult situation for both people. You have to decide whether you are willing to keep living between those two extremes. Because that space, that uncomfortable gap between being someone's comfort and being something they fear, may be exactly where you have been stuck for so long, and living there can slowly drain you. The real question is not simply whether they miss you. They probably do in their own way. The deeper question is whether missing you is strong enough to make them actually face their fears, change their behavior, and do something meaningful about what they feel. And beyond that, there is another question you have to ask yourself. Can you accept the answer, whatever that answer eventually turns out to be? Because sometimes someone can miss you and still remain distant. They can care about you and still be unable to give you consistency. They can feel your absence and still choose not to return. And accepting that possibility does not mean their feelings were fake or that your connection meant nothing. It simply means that feelings alone are not always enough to create the relationship you need. What matters in the end is not only what they feel when you're gone, but what they choose to do when they have the opportunity to come closer. Love can exist behind fear, but a healthy relationship requires more than hidden love. It requires courage, communication, consistency, and action. And you deserve to judge the connection not only by what someone may secretly feel, but by what they are genuinely willing to give.